The wind screams. 3 feet of snow pile against the lodge windows, and visibility has collapsed to nothing. Absolute nothing. The stone hallway is so quiet you can hear the clock on the wall ticking against the howl outside, each second stretching like a century. Salvatore Rossi bursts through the bedroom door carrying a tiny bundle wrapped in white cotton. His newborn son. The infant's lips are blue. His chest does not rise. His eyes do not open. Salvatore's voice cracks like a man breaking in half. Somebody help him. Somebody help my son. Sergio and Gino freeze against the far wall, their black suits and silver rings and 15 years of ruthless loyalty suddenly, devastatingly useless. They exchange a look that says this cannot happen. Not to him. Not to Salvatore Rossi, who bends the city to his will like clay. Vivien moves without thinking. She does not raise her hand or speak. She simply drops to her knees on the hardwood floor, and Salvatore places the infant into her waiting palms. The baby weighs almost nothing. Like holding a ghost. Like holding a prayer that is not being answered. She checks the airway. She tilts the head back. She begins compressions with 2 fingers on the tiny chest, counting in her mind. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Her hands move like they have done this 1,000 times, though they have not. Her hands move like they belong to someone else entirely, someone trained, someone sure, someone not a woman who counts tips at 3 in the morning for rent money she does not have. 30 compressions. 2 breaths into the perfect small mouth. Nothing. The baby's skin remains grey. Almost translucent. Almost already gone. Salvatore grabs her shoulder. His grip is the grip of a man whose power has suddenly become irrelevant. What are you doing? What are you doing to him? She ignores him completely. 30 more compressions. The baby's lips stay blue. And then she sees something in the swelling of the throat, in the way the airway closes like a fist. Not the simple failure of a newborn heart. Something else. Something her mind recognizes even as her body moves forward. She rolls up her sleeve and speaks in a voice that is barely a whisper, barely a sound against the wind. I have O-negative blood. Universal donor. If it is blood loss or shock causing the collapse, if his system is rejecting something, if the proteins are attacking his own tissue, he needs. Salvatore stares at her like she is speaking in a language no one has ever heard. You would do this? For my son? You would bleed for a child you have never met. She does not answer. She is already pressing her arm against the infant's mouth, already reaching for the medical kit beside the bed, already using a sterilized knife to make a small cut on the inside of her wrist. The blood comes dark and immediate. Drops fall onto the baby's tongue. Drop. 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 She continues the compressions. 10 seconds. 15. 20. The infant gasps. Coughs. Screams. Pink floods back into his face like a candle suddenly ignited. His tiny fists clench. His eyes open. He breathes. Salvatore falls against the stone wall, his legs shaking beneath him. His shoulders collapse inward. His face, the face that has commanded fear across an entire city, the face that has sent men to prison and into graves, his face breaks open with tears he does not try to hide. His men stand paralyzed in the corner, Sergio and Gino exchanging a look that says in 15 years they have never, ever seen this. In 15 years they have never seen Salvatore Rossi cry. They have never seen him vulnerable. They have never seen him need anyone. Vivien wraps the infant in fresh cotton and places him gently into his father's arms. The baby is screaming now, and it is the most beautiful sound in the world. It is life. It is survival. It is the sound of a child who will live. Her own arm drips blood onto the hardwood floor. 1 drop. 2 drops. A small pool forming like a signature written in her own body. She whispers. He needs a hospital. A real hospital. Respiratory specialists. Tests. The swelling in his throat, it could return. You need doctors. Salvatore looks at the window. The blizzard outside has intensified. Snow falls so thick it erases the world. The roads are sealed. The gates are buried. The 12 black SUVs parked outside are blocked in by drifts twice the height of a man. They are trapped. They are all trapped here in this stone lodge on a mountain in Louisiana that has become an island in a white sea. And the only person who just saved his son's life is a woman he does not know, a woman who exists on $17 a week, a woman whose own hand still bleeds. But what Vivien did not know, standing there in that hallway with her wrist wrapped in a kitchen towel, was that this moment had been set in motion 6 months earlier. In the basement of St. Catherine's shelter on Rampart Street, where she worked double shifts for $5 an hour, where a terrified 6-year-old girl had been found hiding behind a dumpster in the rain. A child named Ava. A child with dark eyes and Salvatore Ross's exact face. Before we continue, if this story is touching your heart, drop a like. Share this with someone who needs to believe that the invisible people matter. Subscribe so you do not miss what happens next. The betrayal is coming. The danger is coming. But first, you need to understand who Vivien Hartley really is. Now let us go back to the beginning. Let us go back to the moment Vivien stood in the rubble of everything she owned, counting $17 with shaking hands, knowing she had 12 days to save $22,000 or lose everything. The clock on the wall of her ruined studio apartment read 3:41 in the morning. That is when she always counted money. That is when she always felt most alone. The fire had taken everything, the walls, the bed, the clothes in her closet, the photographs of her children before Douglas Hale decided she belonged to him and no one else could have her. But it had not taken the foreclosure notice she kept tucked inside her bra against her heart. She unfolded it carefully, the edges soft and worn from handling. $22,000. That was the number. That was the mountain between her and the ground. That was the price tag on her daughter's life. Ava was 6 years old. Brown eyes like wet chocolate. Curly hair that tangled in the mornings. Ava slept at the shelter 3 blocks away because Vivien had nowhere else to put her, nowhere safe, nowhere with 4 walls and a roof and a lock on the door. Ava slept in a donated cot in a room with 6 other children, and during the day she went to school, and every single moment of every single day, Ava believed that her mother was going to come home and they were going to have a real house again. Vivien had 12 days. She opened her wallet. $17 stared back at her. The bill was crumpled from being counted and recounted, handled like a prayer, treated with the respect reserved for miracles. $17 to last her until her next shift. For more days. She had rice. She had beans. She had learned how to eat on nothing, to swallow less than she needed, to make her own body smaller so that somewhere, somehow, more would be left for her daughter. But $17 would not become $22,000. Not in 12 days. Not in a lifetime at $5 an hour plus tips that never came, not in a lifetime of working double shifts at Russo's Diner, where the owner counted her register 3 times to make sure she was not stealing, where the customers left pennies for gratitude, where she cleaned the grease off the grill at midnight and served hash browns to the same men who had destroyed her apartment 6 months ago. She folded the foreclosure notice and pressed it back against her heart. The wind outside her window rattled the broken glass. Douglas Hale had smashed it when he came. He had smashed everything. And the police had smiled at her with pity and done nothing, because her ex-boyfriend had a cousin on the force, because the system had decided that a woman like Vivien was not worth protecting. 3 blocks away, at St. Catherine's shelter, a small girl woke up in the dark and whispered a name into the silence. Mommy. Just one word. Just one question. And Vivien, sitting in the ruins of her apartment at 3:06 in the morning with $17 and a broken dream, heard nothing. But in 12 days, everything would change. In 12 days, a blizzard would roll down from the north. A baby would stop breathing. And a woman who thought she was invisible would perform a miracle. She did not know it yet. She simply sat in the dark and counted the same $17 again. And at that same hour, in a penthouse downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, Salvatore Rossi paced his office like a caged animal. His physician stood before him, pale, trembling. "The child has a respiratory condition. Congenital. She was separated from her mother at birth, placed in foster care. There are complications. Without constant monitoring, without someone trained." Salvatore's fist crashed against the desk. "Find her. Find the woman. Find the mother. I do not care if she is homeless. I do not care if she is dead. Find her." But the mother did not exist. The records were sealed. The trail had gone cold 3 years ago, and the daughter he had only just discovered existed was dying slowly, invisibly, in a room at St. Catherine's shelter. Ava Rossi did not know who she was. She did not know her father was the most dangerous man in New Orleans. She only knew that the kind woman named Vivien came to tuck her in at night and read her stories and held her hand when the breathing got hard. And she loved her with the ferocious loyalty of a child who recognizes salvation when it appears in the form of a woman with kind eyes and $17 to her name. The apartment was already gone when Vivien arrived at dawn. Charred wood jutted from blackened walls like broken teeth. The smell, acrid, choking, chemical, hung in the November air like a curse that could not be erased. Smoke still rose from the rubble in thin grey threads, curling toward a sky the color of old cement. She stood in the doorway wearing the same clothes she'd worn to work the night shift, orthopedic shoes squeaking on ash-covered concrete, her body trembling not from cold but from the impossible certainty of what she already knew. Douglas Hale had done this. The fire investigator, a man with a tired face and a wedding ring he kept rotating on his finger, stood beside a police officer Vivien recognized, Officer Crawford, who had ignored 3 of her restraining order violation reports in the past 6 months. Crawford wouldn't meet her eyes. "Electrical fire," the investigator said, writing something on a clipboard. "Old wiring. These buildings are fire traps. You're lucky you weren't inside." Lucky. The word hung in the smoke like a lie everyone had agreed to tell. "The boyfriend," Vivien said. Her voice came out steady, which surprised her. "Douglas Hale. He's been following me. I filed reports." Officer Crawford was there when. "We checked his alibi," Crawford interrupted, finally looking at her. His gaze was flat, professional, absolutely empty. He was at a casino downtown with 3 witnesses. Card room surveillance backs it up. Vivien's hands clenched into fists. Douglas had money. Douglas had connections. Douglas's uncle sat on the city council, and his father was a federal judge who played poker with half the police force. The math was simple: his alibi meant nothing, and her 3 reports meant less than nothing. "Everything I owned," Vivien said quietly. "Everything is burned." Crawford shifted his weight. "Insurance should cover." "I had no insurance. I had no savings account that wouldn't be seized. I had no safety deposit box. I had one apartment in a neighborhood nobody cared about, and he burned it because I tried to leave him." She turned away before they could offer another lie, stepping carefully across the threshold into what used to be her bedroom. The furniture was skeleton frames of twisted metal. The mattress had collapsed into itself. She moved through the ruins methodically, searching, though she didn't know what she was searching for, some proof that her life had existed, some evidence that things she'd owned were real. Behind the collapsed dresser, she found it. A plastic frame, warped from heat but still intact. The photograph inside was singed at the edges, the colors slightly faded, but the image remained: 2 children at Audubon Park, maybe 4 and 6 years old, laughing toward the camera with the reckless joy of people who believed they would always be safe. A boy with her mother's eyes. A girl with her father's mouth. Her brother and sister, before everything became impossible. Before her mother left. Before her father stopped answering the phone. She slipped the photograph into her jacket pocket. It was the only thing left that proved they had existed. The walk to Sal's place took 47 minutes. Vivien knew exactly how long because she counted every block, every traffic light, every step that echoed wrong against her shoes. The diner sat in a corner lot downtown, all cracked linoleum and flickering neon that buzzed like an insect trapped in glass. The sign outside was hand-painted sometime in the 1970s, faded now, the letters slightly crooked. Inside, the walls were the color of old grease. Lou DeLuca was already there, unlocking the kitchen. He was 64 years old, built like a fire hydrant, and owned the diner with a kind of grim determination that came from a lifetime of never expecting anything to improve. He looked at Vivien coming through the back door and didn't ask questions about why her hair smelled like smoke or why her hands were shaking. "You're 15 minutes early," Lou said. "Nowhere else to go," Vivien replied. Lou grunted. He pulled an apron from under the counter, starched, stained with coffee and egg yolk, and tossed it to her. "We've got the breakfast rush starting at 5. Table 12 always orders biscuits and gravy. Don't bring them hash browns unless they ask." She tied the apron around her waist, straightened her shoulders, and moved into the rhythm of the work. Vivien had been waiting tables at Sal's place for 3 years, double shifts most days, sometimes triple when Lou needed her. She made minimum wage plus tips, which meant she made just enough to rent the storage unit where her mother's belongings lived in cardboard boxes and to pay for the single room at the women's residence hotel 2 blocks away. Everything else went to the past: medical bills her father had left unpaid, debts from her mother's care, money owed to people who showed up occasionally at her door with envelopes and expressions of patient menace. The photograph stayed in her jacket pocket the entire shift. At 3 in the morning, after the last customer had left and the kitchen had been cleaned, Vivien sat at the counter beside the register and pulled out the day's tips. $17. She knew every bill and coin by sight now. The 3 5s with their creases at slightly different angles. The 4 1s so worn the ink had faded. The 8 quarters, 12 dimes, and 6 nickels that accumulated in the server's apron pocket like loose change at the bottom of a purse. $17. It was what she'd made on a slow night, what she'd made the night before the fire, what she would make tomorrow and the night after that. Lou emerged from the back office holding something white. He set it on the counter beside the pile of coins. A foreclosure notice. Official. Legal. The words printed in the aggressive sans serif font that government agencies use to deliver bad news. Vivien read it twice. $22,000 owed. 12 days to pay. Property in question, storage unit 447 at Secure Keep on Tupetula Street. Contents: 1 wooden dining table, 5 chairs, 3 mattresses, boxes of dishware, linens, books, and personal effects belonging to the estate of Margaret and Hartley, deceased, and stored in default of payment since June of this year. "I'm sorry, kid," Lou said quietly. He was looking at the photograph now, the one she'd set on the counter without thinking about it. The 2 children laughing. "I tried to stall them. They said the company's selling the whole unit if you don't pay by the 15th. Vivien's hands were shaking again. $17. 22,000 owed. The gap between them stretched like an ocean she couldn't cross. Her mother's things, the last evidence that Margaret and Hartley had existed, that she'd been loved, that she'd had a life before the cancer and the morphine and the silence, would be sold to strangers for a fraction of what they were worth. "I'll figure it out," Vivien said. But they both knew she wouldn't. Lou squeezed her shoulder once and went back to the office. Vivien counted the $17 again. Then again. The numbers didn't change. The St. Catherine's shelter sat on the other side of the city in a neighborhood where buildings wore their age like scars. It was a former school building, for stories of brick that had been painted an institutional beige sometime in the 1980s and never repainted. Inside, the hallway smelled like antiseptic and cafeteria food. The walls were lined with hand-drawn pictures from children, colorful, hopeful, completely divorced from the reality of the lives being lived around them. Sister Margaret found Vivien in the kitchen at 6:30 in the morning, still wearing her diner apron. "You're here early," the nun said. She was 72 years old with cataracts that made her eyes look clouded over, but her voice was warm in the way that voices become warm only from decades of choosing kindness. Couldn't sleep, Vivien said. Thought I'd help with breakfast. It wasn't entirely a lie. She simply wasn't going to explain about the fire or the foreclosure notice or the $17 she'd counted again on the bus ride across the city. Sister Margaret had enough burdens already. Come with me, Sister Margaret said. There's something you need to see. They climbed the stairs to the third floor where the smaller children stayed. The hallway was lined with cots separated by thin fabric dividers that gave the illusion of privacy while providing none. Sister Margaret stopped at one of the dividers and pulled it back quietly. A child lay on the cot. 6 years old, maybe 7, it was hard to tell with the way malnutrition and trauma made children look simultaneously ancient and impossibly young. She had dark curls matted against her scalp and skin the color of old pennies. Her eyes were closed, but they moved beneath the lids in the rapid movements of someone deep in a nightmare. She was clutching a stuffed rabbit with one ear missing, and even in sleep she was curled into a tight ball, as if trying to make herself smaller. We found her 3 days ago, Sister Margaret whispered. Behind the storage boxes in the basement. She'd been there at least 2 days. We found an empty peanut butter jar and water bottles. We think she was hiding. From what? Vivien asked. From everything, probably, Sister Margaret said. She hasn't spoken. Won't eat unless someone sits with her. Won't let anyone touch her except, the nun paused. Except you. If you're here. I haven't been here yet today, Vivien said. No. But she asks for you. Every morning when she wakes up. Where's Vivi? Where's Vivi? She says your name like it's the only word she remembers. Vivien felt something catch in her chest. The photograph in her jacket pocket suddenly weighed 1,000 pounds. What's her name? Vivien asked. She won't tell us. There's no ID, no record of her being reported missing in the last week. The authorities are searching, but Sister Margaret trailed off, and Vivien understood. There were thousands of missing children in Louisiana. Thousands of reports filed and forgotten. A 6-year-old girl with no identification was just another statistic in a system designed to lose people. Can I sit with her? Vivien asked. Sister Margaret nodded and withdrew quietly. Vivien pulled a chair beside the cot and sat down. The child slept on, her small chest rising and falling, the nightmare flickering across her face. Vivien reached out slowly, carefully, and placed her hand on the edge of the mattress. Not touching the child yet. Just existing near her. The girl's eyes opened. They were dark green, the color of deep water. They looked directly at Vivien without surprise or fear, as if she'd been expecting her the entire time. As if on some level, the child had been waiting for Vivien to arrive. Hi, Vivien said quietly. I'm Vivien. The girl didn't respond. But her hand came out from under the blanket slowly, carefully, like an animal testing whether it was safe to emerge from its burrow. Her fingers were impossibly small. Vivien pulled the singed photograph from her jacket pocket. She held it where the girl could see it. In the image, 2 children laughed toward the camera. They were safe. They were loved. They were believed in. I lost people too, Vivien said. See these kids? I used to watch them. I loved them so much. And then one day they were just gone. And I've been carrying this picture ever since, just to remember that they were real. That they mattered. The girl stared at the photograph. Then slowly, so slowly, her tiny hand reached out and touched the corner of the frame. Her fingers lingered there for 3 seconds that stretched into eternity. My name is Ava, the girl said. Her voice was barely audible, a sound like wind through a broken window. People hurt me. But I think maybe you won't. Vivien felt her throat close. She set the photograph down and extended her hand, palm up, not reaching toward the child but simply offering her presence. Ava took it. That night, after her shift at Sal's place and after she'd spent 4 hours at the shelter reading stories to Ava and sitting beside her while she slept, Vivien stood at a bus stop watching the rain fall in sheets that caught the streetlight and turned the pavement into a dark mirror. The city was sleeping around her. The buildings were dark. The cars passed with their headlights cutting through the wet air like blades. Somewhere in this city, Douglas Hale was sleeping in his apartment, sure that he'd won. That he'd erased her. That she would break under the pressure of $17 and $22,000 owed and a daughter who wasn't hers but who needed her more than she'd needed anything in her life. And somewhere else in this city, in a penthouse that overlooked the river, a man Vivien had never met was making phone calls to men she didn't know, searching for a child he'd only just discovered and didn't know how to hold. He was using every resource his empire could offer, every connection, every threat, every favor owed to him in blood and money and loyalty. What neither of them knew was that they were already on a collision course. The rain fell harder. Vivien pulled her jacket tighter and waited for the bus. The lodge's great room exploded into chaos. Salvatore Rossi sprinted from the kitchen, his cashmere coat falling to the marble floor, his face draining of all color. The massive stone fireplace cast orange shadows across his features as he moved through the space with pure desperation. Behind him, Vivien Hartley heard it. The silence. Not peaceful silence. The kind of silence that meant a newborn was not breathing. Sergio was already on his phone. Gino rushed past with medical equipment. Salvatore reached the bassinet beside the fireplace where his newborn son lay motionless, skin already turning a shade of blue that made the world stop moving. His name was Marco, 3 days old, and he had just stopped living. "Where is the doctor?" Salvatore's voice was thunder. Raw. Broken. A man who could command empires was helpless against this. "Get me a doctor now." The wind howled against the lodge windows. Snow piled higher. They were completely isolated in the mountains, completely cut off, and a child was dying. Vivien moved without thinking. She had worked in emergency rooms for 2 years before the fire. Before Douglas. Before everything fell apart. She had held dying babies while their mother screamed. Some instinct older than fear took over her limbs. She crossed the room and looked at the child's face, at the bluish gray spreading across his tiny features, at lungs that had forgotten their purpose. "Move," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper, barely audible above the wind, but Salvatore moved. He stepped back. She placed her hands on the baby's chest and began. Gentle compressions. 1,000. 2,000. The baby's ribs were fragile as bird bones beneath her fingers. Marco's father watched a woman he'd known for 6 hours attempt to resurrect his son, and in that moment, he wasn't a crime boss, wasn't a man who commanded loyalty in blood and money. He was just a father watching a stranger try to save what mattered most. The compressions weren't enough. Vivien knew it immediately. The baby's airway was blocked. She tilted his head back, cleared his mouth, nothing visible, but something was wrong, something deep, something that needed intervention she couldn't provide with just her hands and prayer. "There's a blockage," she said. "Internal. He needs." She stopped talking and did what no proper medical professional should ever do. She put her mouth on the newborn's mouth and nose combined, the way you had to with infants, and she breathed. Not air. She pulled her own lip against his teeth, bit down hard enough to draw blood, and forced her blood into his mouth, down into his throat, trying to coat whatever was blocking him, trying to make room for oxygen. Sergio watched this happen. Gino watched. Salvatore watched. The most powerful man in New Orleans stood frozen, unable to do anything but witness a desperate waitress with $17 to her name bleeding into his dying son's lungs. Vivien breathed again. Deeper. The baby's body convulsed. She stopped the compressions and turned his head to the side, and the infant vomited, and with it came blood, his blood mixed with hers, and something else, something membrane-like and wrong, something that had been blocking his airway since birth and had finally dislodged. The baby gasped. His body jerked. His arms flailed. His color shifted from blue to purple to a healthier shade of red. His lungs filled. He screamed, the most beautiful sound any of them had ever heard, a scream that meant life, that meant he was furious at the world and alive enough to be angry about it. Vivien collapsed backward onto the marble floor, gasping herself, her arm bleeding from where her teeth had torn her skin. Salvatore moved faster than light. He had his son in his arms, and he was checking him, looking for wounds, for signs of injury, his hands moving over every inch of the baby with the tenderness of a man handling spun glass. "My son," Salvatore whispered. "My son is breathing." The doctor's voice crackled through Gino's phone. 20 minutes away, fighting the blizzard. Too late. Too late for everything except what had already happened. Sergio stepped forward and helped Vivien to her feet. His expression was unreadable. He retrieved her arm carefully and wrapped it with a clean towel. She was trembling. The adrenaline crash was hitting her like a falling building, and she suddenly understood what she'd done. She'd bitten her own arm, drawn her own blood, and transferred it directly to a newborn she'd met 3 hours ago, whose father was a dangerous man she should have been terrified of but somehow wasn't. Salvatore turned to look at her while still holding his son, while still checking to make sure the baby's breathing continued, that this wasn't some cruel trick of recovery that would reverse itself. His eyes found hers. Storm grey eyes that had seen things no man should see. Eyes that had ordered deaths and absorbed betrayals and learned to see people as assets or liabilities or nothing at all. In this moment, looking at a homeless woman covered in her own blood, he saw something else. He saw mercy. He saw the kind of person who doesn't calculate cost before moving. He saw someone who had nothing but still gave everything. "Sit down," he said quietly. His voice was different now. Still deep, still commanding, but overlaid with something fragile. Something human. Vivien Saturday. The exhaustion hit her in waves. She hadn't eaten since yesterday. She hadn't slept properly in weeks. And now her arm was throbbing with a pain that felt almost clean, almost honest, compared to the invisible bruises that covered the rest of her. Salvatore set his son gently in the bassinet and finally turned his full attention to her. He pulled up a chair and sat close, close enough that she could smell the expensive cologne on him, the kind that probably cost more than her monthly rent would be if she had a home to pay rent on. "You gave your blood to save my son," he said. Not a question. A fact he was still trying to understand. "You don't know me. You owe me nothing." Vivien's voice was barely audible. He was dying. Nothing else mattered. Salvatore studied her for a long moment. Then he said, "Sergio, prepare a guest room. And bring the medical kit." When Sergio left to make the arrangements, Salvatore reached out and gently took Vivien's hand. He turned her arm to examine the damage. His fingers were calloused. His hands were scarred. The hands of a man who had built an empire through means she didn't want to know about. "Thank you," he said quietly. The wind howled outside. The blizzard intensified. Somewhere in the white chaos, Douglas Hale was driving up a mountain in a rage, believing he'd finally tracked his prey to a place where no one would hear her scream. And Salvatore Rossi, sitting in his stone lodge beside the fire, was just beginning to understand that this woman, this nobody, this invisible person, this desperate waitress who'd given her own blood for his child, was going to change the trajectory of his entire life. But neither of them knew it yet. The doctor arrived 40 minutes later, fighting through conditions that shouldn't have been survivable. He examined the baby, confirmed what Vivien's instincts had done. There was a mucus plug, possibly from birth complications, possibly from something else, but it was gone now. The baby was stable. The baby would live. The doctor looked at Vivien's arm and asked, "What happened?" Salvatore answered before she could speak. "She saved my son's life." The doctor turned pale. He understood immediately what that meant: the risk of infection, the danger of direct blood transfer, the absolute desperation of the act. He asked her medical history. She gave it. She was clean. There was nothing to protect against except the wound itself, which he cleaned and bandaged carefully, wrapping her arm in pristine white gauze that covered the bite marks, the blood, the evidence of her sacrifice. When he finished, he looked at Salvatore with an expression of something close to awe. "You're very fortunate, sir. Another minute, and your son would have." "I know," Salvatore said. He was watching Vivien. "I know exactly how fortunate I am. The doctor left before the blizzard could trap him." Salvatore brought Vivien to the guest room that Sergio had prepared. It was larger than any room she'd ever slept in, bed with a down comforter, windows overlooking the white chaos of the mountains, a bathroom with marble counters and heated floors. "Rest," Salvatore told her. "Sleep as long as you need." "I don't understand," Vivien said. She was standing in the doorway, overwhelmed, terrified, completely out of her depth. "Why are you being kind to me? I don't understand the rules here." Salvatore's expression softened in a way that made him look almost vulnerable. "There are no rules here. Only what happened. You bled for my child when you could have run. That changes everything." He closed the door gently behind him. Vivien sat on the edge of the bed, a bed that felt like sleeping on a cloud, a bed that cost more than $17, more than $22,000, more than every bed she'd ever owned in her entire life. She looked at her bandaged arm and realized that she had just given part of herself to the daughter of darkness, and somehow that made her feel less invisible than she'd ever felt before. Vivien sat on the edge of the bed in that impossible room, a bed that felt like sleeping on a cloud, a bed that cost more than $17, more than $22,000, more than every bed she'd ever owned in her entire life. She looked at her bandaged arm and realized that she had just given part of herself to the daughter of darkness, and somehow that made her feel less invisible than she'd ever felt before. But invisibility, she would soon learn, was a luxury she could no longer afford. 2 days passed in a strange suspension. The blizzard intensified outside the lodge, trees cracking under the weight of ice like the sound of breaking bones. Vivien moved through the halls carrying Ava's hand, pushing the baby stroller, watching Salvatore with the children and feeling something dangerous stir in her chest. He braided Ava's hair with careful fingers. He sang to the baby in Italian, his voice rough but steady like an oath. She had never seen a man like this, powerful enough to destroy worlds, but gentle enough to let a 6-year-old guide his hands. On the second evening, her phone buzzed. A message from the diner manager in New Orleans: "Your paycheck has been frozen pending fraud investigation. The account shows unauthorized activity. We cannot release funds at this time." Vivien's hands went numb. Victoria. The foreclosure deadline had passed yesterday. She had lost everything. The house where her mother's photographs hung, the bedroom Ava had slept in during those 3 weeks of foster care, the last physical evidence that Vivien Hartley had ever mattered to anyone at all. She excused herself and went to the guest room, locked the door, and sat on the marble edge of the bathtub. The crumpled foreclosure notice was still in her jacket pocket, folded and refolded until it was soft as cloth. 30 days to vacate. Those 30 days were now 4 days past. Her phone rang. Victoria's name glowed on the screen. "Darling," Victoria's voice dripped honey and venom. "I'm just calling to check on you. How is dear Salvatore? Still protecting his little charity case?" Vivien said nothing. "I've arranged for some financial clarifications regarding your employment," Victoria continued. "That paycheck was the last one you'll ever see from the diner. I made sure of it. And I sent a lovely letter to the Social Services Department explaining how you've been keeping a child off the books, committing fraud, living in a lodge with a known criminal. Ava will be back in the system by morning. Isn't that tragic?" The line went dead. Vivien stood in that bathroom, heated floors, marble counters, more luxury in one room than she'd ever known in her life, and felt the walls closing in. At 2 a.m., she heard the breaking glass. The sound came from somewhere below, sharp and violent. Vivien's body moved on instinct before her mind caught up. She ran to Salvatore's room, but he was already moving, already awake. His hand went to the gun on his nightstand with the fluidity of long practice. "Stay here," he said. She didn't stay. She followed, barefoot, down the hallway. Douglas Hale stood in the corridor like something that had crawled out of hell. unshaven, wild-eyed. 3 days of stalking through the blizzard had left him raw and feral. He gripped a hunting knife, the blade catching the light from the sconces on the wall. 3 states, Douglas said, his voice cracking. I followed you through 3 states, Vivien. You think you can hide with some rich criminal and I'll just forget you? You're mine. Vivien backed away. Douglas, please. This doesn't have to. He lunged. Salvatore appeared from the side room, caught Douglas's wrist, twisted until the knife clattered to the floor. Douglas tried to fight, his fists swinging wild and desperate, but Salvatore moved like someone performing a task he'd done 1,000 times before. One movement. Precise. Brutal. Douglas's scream echoed through the lodge as his arm broke. Sergio and Gino rushed in with weapons drawn, their faces expressionless. Take him to the basement, Salvatore said, his voice flat and certain. Secure him. We'll deal with this when the storm clears. But Douglas wasn't alone. His 3 men crashed through the front door in a spray of snow and violence. Gunfire erupted, sharp pops that seemed to split the night into fragments. Glass shattered. Plaster exploded from the walls. Vivien ran toward Ava's room, grabbed her, ran to the nursery where the baby slept, gathered him into her arms. We need to go, she whispered. Now. She ran for the safe room Salvatore had shown her 3 days ago, a steel-lined space that could withstand siege. She locked the door behind her, locked the children inside, locked herself inside with them. Ava trembled against her chest. Is the bad man here? Vivien pulled the girl close. Your father won't let him hurt us. I promise. She sat with her back against the steel door, Ava asleep against her shoulder, the baby in her arms. Gunshots continued below, muffled pops, men shouting, something heavy crashing. She didn't know if Salvatore was alive or dead. Her phone showed 4:36 a.m., the battery at 3%. The foreclosure deadline had passed. Douglas was somewhere in this lodge hunting her. Victoria had destroyed her financially and socially. The walls felt like they were closing in. She looked at the sleeping children and thought, they would be safer without me. Everyone I touch gets hurt or dies. Her mother. Her siblings in that crash. Now Salvatore and his family pulled into her nightmare. Her hand reached for paper and pen on the safe room desk. She started writing, Salvatore, by the time you read this. But Ava shifted in her sleep, murmured something soft and broken, don't go, Veen, stay. That tiny voice. That stopped her cold. Vivien set down the pen, held both children tighter, and decided, no. Not anymore. I don't disappear. She picked up the phone, sent Salvatore her location in the safe room even though the battery was dying, then waited in the darkness. Downstairs, Salvatore fought with the precision of a man who had spent 15 years perfecting violence. Douglas's 3 men were sloppy, desperate, driven by desperation instead of discipline. Sergio took down 2. Gino disarmed the 3rd. Douglas himself crawled toward the stairs, broken arm dangling, screaming, she's mine. You can't have her. She belongs to me. Salvatore stepped over him without emotion. No. She belongs to herself. You just never learned that. He signaled to Sergio, make the call. Meanwhile, Victoria Ashford arrived at the base of the mountain in a luxury SUV with 2 private security contractors. The blizzard had paused temporarily, offering a narrow window. She wore a white fur coat, diamond earrings catching light that seemed to belong to her alone. Her plan was simple, drag Vivien out, stage it as a rescue gone wrong, tragic accident in the storm. She called Salvatore, I'm coming up to help. Don't worry, darling. I'll fix this mess. Salvatore's voice was ice, stay where you are, Victoria. This is not your concern. She ignored him and started up the mountain road. But Salvatore had already made his own call. From the tree line, 12 black vehicles appeared like ghosts materializing from the snow, Salvatore's rivals, the Calabrese family that his brother Dante once sold him to. But Salvatore had made a deal: take Victoria, Ashford and Douglas Hale. Do what you want with them. In exchange, the territory dispute ends. Marco Calabrese stepped out of the lead vehicle, grey-haired, scarred from cheekbone to temple, ruthless as frostbite. We accept your terms, Rossi. Where are they? One is secured below, Salvatore said. The other approaches from the south. Marco smiled. Excellent. 12 men in black tactical gear moved through the lodge like predators. They brought Douglas Hale from the basement, and when he saw Marco Calabrese, he collapsed, trembling like a cornered animal, begging, "No, no, no, please, I didn't mean, I'll leave her alone, I swear." Marco's voice was stone. You stalked a woman under Salvatore Rossi's protection. You burned her home. You came to his lodge with weapons. What did you think would happen? Douglas tried to run. They dragged him through the snow, his screams cutting through the mountain silence. They threw him in a vehicle and disappeared down the mountain. Not death, too quick, too easy, too merciful. An hour later, Marco's text arrived, delivered to associates in Texas. Federal charges for interstate stalking, arson, weapons trafficking. 40 years minimum. He'll never see daylight as a free man again. Victoria's SUV was intercepted 1 mile from the lodge. She stepped out confused, annoyed. "Excuse me, who are you people?" Marco's lieutenant showed her a folder. Victoria Ashford. 3 shell companies used to launder money from the Rossi organization without authorization. Tax fraud. Securities violations. We've already sent evidence to the FBI. Your lawyers were arrested an hour ago. So were your accountants. The FBI is raiding your Manhattan apartment right now. Victoria's face drained of color. She screamed Salvatore's name into the snow. When he answered, his voice came through her phone speaker. You orchestrated public humiliation and financial sabotage against Vivien Hartley. You endangered my family by revealing our location to a violent stalker. You stole from my organization while pretending partnership. Victoria, you are invisible to me now. He hung up. Marco's men escorted her away, not to violence, but to systematic destruction. Federal prison. 40 years. Public arrest televised. Every asset seized. Her social circle abandoned her within hours. She was dragged away screaming into the dawn, snow falling softly, erasing her footprints from the mountain as if she had never existed at all. Snow falls against the lodge windows with the sound of whispered prayers. Vivien Hartley stands in the great room, barefoot on marble tile that stretches like a frozen lake, holding a letter she wrote with shaking hands 3 hours ago. Her letter. The one she left on the dresser before she tried to disappear. The one Salvatore Rossi now holds in his scarred hands, the paper creased from his grip, his knuckles still striped with blood from the violence that came before dawn. He's reading it. Reading her confession. Reading the words she wrote about burning the world down to protect his family, about feeling things she has no right to feel, about being nobody trying to love somebody powerful enough to destroy her with a single word. The fire crackles. Wind rattles the windows. Outside, the mountain is silent in that terrible way that comes after storms pass and truth settles like snow on everything. You were going to leave, Salvatore says. Not a question. His voice is like gravel, rough and heavy. He looks up from the letter, and his eyes, those storm-grey eyes that have commanded armies and bent cities to his will, are red at the edges. Not tears. Not yet. But close. Without saying goodbye. You were going to walk down that mountain and disappear into whatever life could have you. Vivien cannot meet his gaze. She looks at her own hands instead. They're clean now. The blood washed away. But she can still feel it there, Marcus's blood mixing with her own, the moment she knelt on the floor of that bedroom and refused to let a child die. The moment everything changed. It's cleaner this way, she says. Her voice is barely audible, like wind through empty buildings. Clean break. You go back to your life. I go back to mine. Nobody gets hurt. There is nothing clean about what you're proposing. Salvatore crosses the room in 3 strides. He's still wearing the black shirt from last night, untucked now, and the scar on his jaw catches the firelight. He holds the letter between them like evidence. Like a blade. You think you're nobody. You think you bring danger to my door. Both are lies. Your business associate tried to kill me, Vivien says. Your stalker ex burned my apartment. People around you get destroyed, Salvatore. That's not a metaphor. That's pattern. Victoria Ashford was never my associate. His voice drops lower, takes on a texture like iron. She was a parasite who mistook proximity for importance. She's gone now. 40 years in federal prison. Douglas Hale, also gone. 40 years. Interstate stalking. Arson. Weapons trafficking. They won't hurt anyone ever again. Not you. Not my children. Not anyone. The wind pushes against the windows with enough force that Vivien flinches. Outside, the plows are coming. The roads will open. The world will start moving again. And everything she's built in this sanctuary, this impossible 3 days where she was seen by someone powerful enough to make her matter, will collapse the moment she steps outside these walls. Until the next one, she whispers. There's always a next one in your world. Salvatore sets the letter on the mantel beside a framed photograph of his children. Marcus, 3 days old, wrapped in white. Ava, 7 years old, holding her baby brother like he's made of spun glass. When he looks back at Vivien, his expression has shifted into something that terrifies her more than any threat ever could. Gentleness. Then we face it together, he says. The words don't make sense at first. They land in her mind like a language she doesn't speak, and she has to translate them slowly, word by word, syllable by syllable, before the meaning breaks through. Together. He's offering together. You gave blood to save my son, Salvatore continues. He closes the distance between them, and Vivien can smell him, smoke and cologne and something underneath that smells like strength. You protected my daughter for months when I couldn't find her. You wrote me a letter confessing feelings you believe you have no right to feel. Vivien, I have felt the same thing since the moment you knelt beside that crib and refused to let him die. Not since this week. Not since yesterday. Since that moment. I have felt it like a blade through my chest. Tears come now. Not the careful tears of someone trying to stay composed. Real tears, the kind that crack your voice and blur your vision and make you ugly and honest all at once. I have $17, she says. I have enough for both of us. I work at a diner. So work at the diner. He says it like working at a diner is the most reasonable, most beautiful thing anyone could do. I don't care if you work at the diner for the next 50 years. I don't care if you work as a maid or a teacher or a shelter worker protecting other women nobody else sees. I care that you stay. That you let me see you. That you stop trying to disappear. Your world will eat me alive, Vivien says, and she almost believes it. Then I'll make sure it doesn't. His hand comes up to her face, and his touch is gentle. Careful. Like she's made of something fragile. Please. Stay. Footsteps sound from the upstairs hallway. Light, child-sized footsteps, moving toward the landing. Then a small voice, thin and uncertain, cutting through the silence like a prayer. V? Are you leaving? Ava stands at the top of the stairs in pajamas that Sergio bought her weeks ago, her dark eyes wide with panic, her hand gripping the banister. Behind her, through the open doorway to the nursery, Vivien can see Marcus sleeping in his crib, peaceful now, his small chest rising and falling with the deep breaths of a child who doesn't yet know what it means to lose things. Vivien looks at Salvatore. Then at the crumpled foreclosure notice he retrieved from somewhere and left on the coffee table beside the fireplace, that piece of paper that represents everything she was trying to save, 12 days, $22,000, a life she thought she had to reclaim alone. then at Ava, who is waiting for an answer that will determine whether her world stays broken or gets to be whole. "I don't know how to do this," Vivien says quietly. "Neither do I," Salvatore answers. "We'll figure it out." Ava descends the stairs slowly, her small face serious. She takes Vivien's hand without asking permission and pulls her toward the fire. "Colors for sad days," she says, reaching into the pocket of her pajamas and withdrawing a folded piece of construction paper covered in crayon drawings. "Blues and purples and dark greens, colors children use to explain what sadness looks like. When you feel sad, look at this. I made it. It's for you to keep." Vivien unfolds it with hands that shake. The drawings are simple. A woman. A man. 2 children. Standing together. Fire around them, but the fire is gold, not red. Transforming. Building instead of destroying. "Okay," Vivien says. Her voice breaks on the word. "Okay. I'll stay." 6 months later, the community center in New Orleans opens its doors on a Monday morning in spring. The building is freshly renovated, white walls, large windows, new furniture arranged in intimate groupings. The funding came from an anonymous donor. The vision came from Vivien Hartley, who still works morning shifts at Sal's Place Diner but now has orthopedic shoes that don't hurt her feet and moves with the confidence of someone who knows she matters. She counts tips at 6 in the morning. $32 today. Not bad for a Monday. She transfers the bills into a locked box beneath the register, money for the shelter's emergency fund, for women who flee with nothing but bruises and borrowed clothes and the desperate knowledge that they cannot go home. By noon, she's at the community center. 23 women have passed through in 6 months. 23 women have learned that being invisible is a lie the world tells to keep you small, and that the moment someone sees you, everything becomes possible. Salvatore appears in the doorway carrying lunch, pasta from his restaurant, bread, fresh fruit. He does this twice a week. Shows up unannounced. Sits with the women. Listens to their stories without judgment while Sergio and Gino, his lieutenants, run background checks on violent exes and restraining order violators. 3 men have disappeared in 6 months. No one asks questions. Ava is here too, home from private school, curled on a reading corner cushion with 3 younger children gathered around her like she's a beacon. She reads to them from picture books, her voice patient and gentle, her presence a small miracle of healing. Victoria Ashford's social media accounts, once flooded with images of luxury, of power, of influence bought and borrowed, are frozen monuments to her downfall. She is currently serving year 1 of a 40-year federal sentence at a federal facility in Pennsylvania. No visitors. No appeals granted. No one remembers her name. Douglas Hale lives in a federal facility in Texas. 40 years for interstate stalking, arson, weapons trafficking. The restraining order against him is permanent. His letters to Vivien arrive unopened. She burns them without reading a single word. The storage unit that held everything she owned was retrieved. $22,000 paid by Salvatore the day after the blizzard ended. Vivien's mother's jewelry. Her sister's baby clothes. The family photographs. They are displayed in her new apartment, modest but safe, in a building Salvatore owns where security cameras cover every entrance, and the rent, after weeks of negotiation, settled at fair market value because Vivien insisted on paying her way. She is learning that someone powerful doesn't have to destroy you. He can choose mercy instead. He is learning that mercy doesn't equal weakness. The fireplace in the lodge is the same as it was that night. But now it's summer, and when Vivien sits in the great room during her monthly visits, green mountains roll beyond the windows instead of snow. Salvatore hands her the foreclosure notice, the one she carried for weeks, creased and worn, a map of her desperation. "I kept this," he says. "Wanted you to see how far you've come." Vivien studies the paper. From $17 to running a center that has saved 23 lives. From invisible to seen. From nobody to somebody who refused to stay small. "You know what the strangest part is?" she asks. For years, I thought being nobody kept me safe. Turned out being nobody just made me a target. The moment you really saw me, everything changed. Salvatore moves closer. His hand finds hers. You were always visible, Vivien. You just needed someone looking in the right direction. Sometimes the people who seem invisible carry the greatest light. They are the ones who give blood to save strangers, who protect children who aren't theirs, who stand in the ashes of their lives and choose to rebuild rather than disappear. Vivien Hartley had $17 when everything burned down. She needed $22,000 to reclaim her past. But what she found instead was worth more than any dollar amount. She found someone who saw her worth when the world insisted she had none. Not all debts are paid in money. Some are paid in mercy. In protection. In the choice to see someone when they have been invisible for too long. If this story moved you, drop a like. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that being nobody is a lie the world tells to keep you small. Subscribe now. Comment below, have you ever felt invisible? What changed? New story drops tomorrow at 3 p.m. Until then, remember. You are seen. You matter. Your light is brighter than you know. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. Goodbye, and we will see you again in the next video.